Restart. The morning sun rose lazily over the quiet suburb, casting long golden streaks across the pavement. Mark tightened his shoelaces, the familiar rhythm of his heartbeat syncing with the chirping birds outside. It was the first Saturday of his adult life. He had turned 18 just 2 days ago, and the world felt wide open. College acceptance letters sat on his desk, unopened, and the future seemed like a blank page waiting to be written. Seal Beach, California had been the best home for his family, and now that he just graduated high school, his mind was on the future. He stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air, and began to jog down the empty street. The world was still half asleep. Sprinklers hissed softly, and the smell of wet grass filled the air. Mark's sneakers slapped against the asphalt in steady rhythm, his thoughts drifting between excitement and uncertainty. He wondered what kind of man he would become, what kind of life he would build. Then, as he rounded the corner near the large gas station, everything changed. A sudden silence fell. The birds stopped singing. The wind froze mid-whisper. Mark stumbled to a halt, confusion flashing across his face. The air shimmered beside him, and from that shimmer stepped a figure, brilliant, radiant, and utterly still. The figure's eyes glowed like molten gold, and when it spoke, the sound was both thunder and whisper. "Mark," the being said, "time is paused. You have 30 seconds to decide the fate of over 100 souls." Mark's breath caught in his throat. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice trembling. The angel's gaze never wavered. "In less than a minute, a driver will pass this intersection." He is distracted, his phone in one hand, his coffee in the other. He will lose control and crash into that gas station. The angel gestured toward the corner, where a family was fueling their car, unaware of the frozen moment around them. Mark's eyes darted to the still scene. The father's hand was mid-motion, the mother's hair frozen in the wind, a child's balloon suspended mid-air. "You're saying they'll die," he whispered. The angel nodded. "And not only them. The explosion will spread. The fire will consume nearby buildings, cars, homes. 103 people will perish." The angel stepped closer, its voice softening. "Among them is a young girl named Lila. She will grow to become a scientist who ends world hunger and develops medicines that save billions. Her death will erase that future." Mark's heart pounded. "You're telling me I can stop this?" "How?" The angel's expression darkened. "Step into the road. The car will strike you instead. The driver will stop. The crash will never happen. The others will live." Mark felt the world tilt. "You want me to die?" he asked, his voice cracking. The angel didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, and suddenly Mark's mind filled with visions. Flames roaring through the gas station, screams echoing, the sky black with smoke. He saw faces, children, parents, strangers, all consumed in an instant. Then he saw the aftermath, the grief, the funerals, the empty playgrounds. Tears welled in his eyes as the vision shifted. He saw Lila, grown, standing before a crowd, announcing a breakthrough that would feed the starving. He saw hospitals filled with patients healed by her discoveries. He saw a world changed because she had lived. The vision faded, and Mark found himself trembling, staring at the angel. "How do I know you're real?" he whispered. "Maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe this is some sick trick." The angel's eyes softened, almost human now. "Faith is not knowing," it said quietly. "Faith is acting on belief, in choosing." Mark clenched his fists. "Why me? There are millions of people. Why pick me?" The angel's golden light flickered like sunlight through water. "Because you were running toward life, not away from it. Because your heart is still unscarred by cynicism. Because you would ask that question instead of turning away." Mark swallowed hard. "If I do this, what happens to me?" Do I go anywhere? Will I see my family again? The angel's gaze turned distant, sorrowful. You will not see them in this world, but you will not be gone. Every life you save will carry a piece of your breath. Every heartbeat that continues because of you will echo your name in silence. Mark's voice cracked. That's not an answer. The angel's light dimmed slightly, as if time itself were running out. There are no answers that fit inside 30 seconds, Mark. Only choices. Mark's voice broke. 30 seconds. Mark looked down at his hands. They were shaking. I don't want to die, he said, almost to himself. I haven't even lived yet. The angel stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. The touch was warm, almost human. Then live in this moment. Live for them. That is the greatest life one can give. Mark stared into the angel's eyes, and for an instant he saw something infinite. Love, sorrow, eternity all tangled together. He wanted to ask more, but the world around him began to hum, the frozen air trembling. The angel's voice grew faint. Time resumes now. Choose. Mark looked toward the frozen car at the end of the street, its driver's face illuminated by the glow of a phone screen. Mark noticed subtly that time started to slowly move. Time was about to restart. The angel's words echoed in his mind, and for a moment he thought of his parents, his friends, the life he had barely begun. He wanted to live. He wanted to see what the future held for him. But then he looked again at the gas station, the family, the child with the balloon, and something inside him shifted. His fear gave way to a strange calm. He took one last breath, the air heavy with the scent of morning dew. When time resumed, the world roared back to life. The car sped forward, the driver oblivious. Mark stepped off the curb, into the sunlight, into the path of destiny. The impact came like thunder, broken glass, the sound of bending metal, people in shock, and a woman's scream. And then, silence. Far away at the gas station, a small balloon slipped from a child's hand and drifted peacefully into the sky. The angel stood at the corner, watching the scene unfold, its golden light flickering faintly. A slow, sickly grin spread across its perfect face. Oh my, it murmured, voice dripping with something darker than pity. How selfless. It tilted its head, eyes glinting like embers. The grin widened, twisting the once beautiful features into something almost predatory. Good, it whispered under its breath, the word curling through the air like smoke. And then it was gone. Mark remembered the screech of tires before the world shattered. Metal crumpled, glass burst, and pain exploded through his body, sharp, total, and consuming. For a heartbeat, he tried to breathe, but his lungs refused. The agony was too much, a white-hot wave that tore through him until, mercifully, it began to fade. Then came the silence. In that stillness, flashes of his life tore through his mind. His brother Madden, laughing as they raced bikes down the old dirt road. His sister Mika, tiny hands clutching his when she was scared of thunderstorms. He saw his mom's warm smile at the kitchen table, his dad's rough hands resting on his shoulder after every hard day. And then Christine, his girlfriend since freshman year. Her eyes, her voice, the way she said his name like it meant something. The realization hit him harder than the impact ever could. He would never see them again, never hear their voices, never hold them, never say goodbye. The grief came swift and deep, but beneath it was something else, release. The pain ebbed away, replaced by a strange calm. The weight of his body vanished. He felt himself drift, untethered, free of breath, free of fear. There was no heartbeat, no sound, only stillness. And then suddenly air rushed back into his lungs. It wasn't gentle. It was violent. His chest convulsed as if he'd been ripped from the bottom of the ocean. He gasped, choking on air that burned like fire in his throat. His body trembled uncontrollably, muscles seizing, fingers clawing at the ground as he coughed and wheezed. Every nerve screamed, every breath came ragged and raw. He rolled onto his side, clutching his chest, the world spinning around him. The sound of wind filled his ears, soft at first, then clearer, like the world itself was slowly waking up with him. The scent of grass, of earth, of rain-soaked air filled his lungs. He blinked hard, tears streaming down his face as his vision steadied. He was lying in a field, tall grass swaying gently, trees rising like sentinels around him under a pale silver sky. Birds, which he has never seen before, silver and yellow, flew in a flock above his head. The ground was cool beneath his palms, his heart hammered, wild and alive. Mark sat up slowly, his body shaking with each movement. He looked down at himself. His clothes were torn and stained, but his skin was whole. No blood, no broken bones, no pain. He touched his face, his arms, his chest, disbelief flooding through him. "What the hell?" he whispered, voice trembling. A few feet away, two others were stirring. One, a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man, was sitting up, running his hands over his arms, his neck, his chest with wide eyes. His palms pressed against his face, then down his shoulders, as if confirming what he couldn't believe. "My skin," he muttered, voice thick with awe. "It's not burned. It's—" He stopped, staring at his hands, flexing them in the light. "It's whole." The other, a young Asian man, wiry and alert, was breathing hard, his eyes darting around in confusion. Then, as if remembering something, he grabbed the hem of his shirt and lifted it. His breath caught. His stomach was smooth, unmarked, no stab wounds, no scars. He ran his fingers over the skin, shaking his head. I was stabbed. Over and over, I felt it. I felt every one." His voice cracked. "But there's nothing. Not even a mark. No more blood." Mark stared at them both, still trembling, still trying to steady his breathing. "Where are we?" he finally managed. The younger man looked up, eyes wide. "I was hoping one of you could tell me that." The older man, Banks, stood, scanning the tree line. "Doesn't look like anywhere I've seen before. You two okay?" Mark wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, still catching his breath. "Yeah," he said, though his voice was unsteady. "I think so." He hesitated, then added, "Name's Mark." The younger man nodded. "I'm James." "Banks," the tall man said simply, his deep voice carrying easily across the quiet field. For a moment, none of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees again, and a crow called somewhere in the distance. James broke the silence first. "What's the last thing you guys remember?" Mark's eyes lowered as the memory came flooding back, heavy and vivid. "I was jogging," he began softly. It was early. The street was quiet, just the hum of light traffic in the distance. Then I heard it, a horn blaring, tires screaming. I turned and saw a car flying down the hill. The driver wasn't even looking. He was on his phone. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. He was heading straight for a mega gas station at the corner. I could see it in my head before it happened. The crash, the explosion, the fire ripping through the block. Hundreds dead, families, kids. And then, time stopped. His eyes went distant, unfocused. Everything froze. The car, the lights, even the wind. And that's when I saw him. An angel. He said there wasn't time to stop the driver, that the explosion would destroy everything. He told me one of the survivors, a little girl, would grow up to save the world, that her life would shape the one who ends all suffering. Mark's voice cracked. I asked what I could do. He said, "Step forward." Just that. I didn't understand until time started again. I stepped into the road, and the car hit me head on. He stared at the ground, his hands trembling. I remember the sound of the impact, the glass shattering, the metal folding in, then the heat, the smell of gasoline, and then nothing. He drew in a shaky breath. I didn't even get to say goodbye to my family, or Christine. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the air seemed to mourn with them. Banks finally broke it, shaking his head slowly. That angel asked you to step directly in front of a car? He let out a low whistle. That's straight up cold, man. Mark looked up at him, eyes hollow but certain. Yeah, he said quietly. Cold doesn't even begin to cover it. For a moment, none of them spoke. The weight of what they'd done, what they'd lost, hung heavy between them. Banks finally exhaled and looked down. Firefighter, he said. House fire. I went back in for a woman trapped inside. The flames were everywhere. No way out. I saw her death before it happened. I don't know how, but I knew she was meant to live. He stared at the ground, his voice trembling despite his size. Then I heard a voice, an angel voice, I think. It told me what to do. Said I had to bring the roof down in the hallway on myself to save her. That she had to live. That her life would teach the one who saves the world. He exhaled shakily, his eyes distant. I didn't want to die. I wanted to see my little boy again. He is only 6, but I cut the burning roof and its beam. The roof came down, and I saw her run out through the flames. I saw her make it outside. He swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. Then everything went black. I just hoped my son would understand someday. The weight of his words lingered in the air like smoke. James stood quietly, his hands trembling slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost broken. I was working at a youth shelter. A fight broke out, some gang kids, scared, angry. One of them pulled a knife, screaming at some poor guy trying to volunteer. I stepped in, tried to calm him down, but it escalated fast. He looked up, eyes distant. Then time froze. Everything just stopped. The blade was hanging in the air, inches from this guy's chest, and that's when I saw him. An angel. Wings like sunlight, eyes like gold. They could see through everything you've ever done. James's voice wavered. He told me I could save myself if I wanted. That I didn't have to die. But then he showed me something. He showed me the man's future. That he'd marry a girl who'd change the world. End hunger. Cure diseases. Save millions. He said my choice would decide if that future ever happened. He took a shaky breath. So I jumped in front of the gang. The knife went in. Then another. And another. The gangbanger just lost it. Stabbed me again and again. I remember the pain, the hot blood, the heat, the sound of my heartbeat slowing down. I remember thinking, this can't be it. His voice broke. But then the angel's voice came back, quiet this time. He said, you chose well. And everything went dark. The 3 men stood in silence. The air around them felt heavier now, thick with grief, with the echo of lives cut short for reasons none of them fully understood. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Banks looked up, his brow furrowed. Hold on, he said slowly. That girl you mentioned, Mark, the one the angel said would grow up to save the world. James's eyes narrowed, realizing it too. The woman you saved, Banks. The one who'd teach the one who saves the world. Mark's breath caught. And the guy you saved, James, the one who'd marry the girl who changes everything. The 3 of them stared at each other as the pieces fell into place. Banks let out a low whistle. You're telling me all 3 of us died for the same chain of people? Mark nodded slowly, the weight of it settling in. Not just people, he said quietly. A line. A path. Every one of them connected, leading to her. James exhaled, His voice hushed. She must be unreal. Someone so important it took 3 lives, 3 angels' interventions to keep her alive. Banks crossed his arms, his expression hard but thoughtful. 3 that we know of, he said. Who knows how many others had to die just to make sure she drew another breath. Mark looked down, his voice soft but steady. Then she better be everything they said she'd be. James nodded. She will be. She has to be. The wind stirred again, carrying a faint hum through the trees, low, resonant, almost like a heartbeat. The 3 men turned toward the sound, the air around them thickening, shimmering faintly with light. Mark took a step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Whatever this place is, I think we're about to find out why we're here. Are we dead? I feel pretty alive to be dead, said Mark. Banks, without warning, stuck James hard in his arm. James screamed, "What the hell?" as he fell to the ground. Man, that hurt. Banks and James both looked at Mark, who started to laugh, a deep laugh. Well, it looks like we are alive even if it makes no sense. They all started to laugh. Mark rubbed his palms against his knees, trying to steady the tremor in his hands, and he ended laughing. The silence had stretched long enough that even the wind seemed to hesitate. Finally, he looked up at the others. Do either of you have anything on you? He asked. Like a phone, wallet, anything? Banks blinked, then patted his jeans and jacket pockets. Yeah, he said slowly. Got my wallet. Keys. Pocket knife. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small folding blade, the kind worn smooth from years of use. He turned it over in his hand, frowning. This was in my locker at the station. Shouldn't be here. James started checking himself next. Phone's here, he said, pulling it from his pocket. The screen lit up, but there was no signal, but it worked. No service. Figures. He reached for his chest, then frowned. My badge is gone. I always wore it clipped right here. He tapped the spot over his heart. It's just missing. Mark stood, brushing grass from his jogging shorts. I've got mine too, he said, holding up his phone. The screen flickered faintly, then steadied. Battery's full, but no reception. No GPS, no Wi-Fi, nothing. He slid it back into his pocket, glancing down at his running shoes. I was out for a jog when it happened. These are the same clothes I had on when I died. Banks crouched beside a glint of metal in the grass. When he reached for it, his breath caught. You've got to be kidding me. He lifted a fire axe, his firehouse axe, its red paint chipped, the handle scorched near the base. This was in the house when the roof came down. James stared at it, then at Banks. So whatever brought us here, it brought that too? Looks like it, Banks said, setting it down carefully beside him. But why this? Why any of it? Mark looked between them, his brow furrowed. Maybe it's not about what we had, it's about what we need. Banks gave a short, humorless laugh. What I need is an explanation. James pocketed his phone again, his expression uneasy. Or a way home. Mark's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the silver light still shimmered faintly through the trees. Yeah, he said softly. One step at a time. Mark turned his phone in his hand, the screen bright against the dim silver light. Everything looked normal. Battery full, clock ticking forward, notifications showing from hours ago. The only thing wrong was the top corner of the screen. SOS, where the signal bars should be. No service, he said quietly. Just SOS. Banks checked his own iPhone and nodded. Same here. Everything else works fine, though. Camera, flashlight, notes, even music. He swiped through his apps, then turned the flashlight on, its white beam cutting through the mist. Guess the hardware's fine. Just no connection. James powered on his Samsung, the familiar startup chime echoing faintly in the still air. Mine too, he said. It's working like normal, just no network. Says SOS. Only he dug into his pocket and pulled out a charger, the cable neatly coiled. Still have this somehow. It was in my desk at work. Mark gave a short laugh. I had my phone in my pocket when I went out for a run. Didn't think I'd still have it after. He trailed off, eyes drifting toward the horizon. Whatever this is. Banks turned the phone over in his hand, then looked at the axe lying beside him. So we've got working phones, no service, and a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be here. Great. James pocketed his charger. At least the phones prove something. Yeah? Banks asked. What's that? That this place isn't a dream, James said. Dreams don't give you battery percentages. Mark looked down at his screen again. The clock ticked another minute forward. The world around them stayed still. Then we're really here, he said quietly. Banks exhaled through his nose. Guess the question is, where's here? The three of them stood in silence, the faint hum of wind brushing through the grass. Their phones glowed softly in their hands, the only light in a place that shouldn't have let them bring anything at all. Banks stopped walking and squinted toward the horizon. The others nearly bumped into him. Hey, he said, pointing ahead. Do you guys see that in the distance? Is that a church steeple? Mark shaded his eyes. Through the pale haze, a thin, sharp silhouette rose above the uneven horizon, a spire, jagged, but still standing. James tilted his head. Could be, or what's left of one. Banks nodded slowly. If there's a church, there's a town. Maybe people. Mark gave a short, uneasy laugh. Or maybe just more empty fields. We don't even know where we are. Banks turned to face them, his tone calm but firm. Standing here arguing about it won't help. We can either walk towards something or stand in a circle until we starve to death. I know which one I'm picking. James looked down at his phone, still showing SOS only. He's got a point, he said quietly. If there's anyone out here, they'll be in that town. Mark sighed, glancing back the way they came. Nothing but endless grass and still air. Yeah, fine. Let's go. They started walking again, the steeple growing clearer as they moved. The silence pressed in around them, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the occasional rustle of wind. After a while, Mark spoke. You think anyone's actually there? Banks shrugged. We'll find out soon enough. James kicked at a rock, sending it skittering ahead of them. Feels weird, though. Like we're walking through a painting. Everything's too still. Yeah, Mark said. No birds. No bugs. Not even a breeze half the time. Banks adjusted the strap of his pack. Keep your head straight. If there's a town, we'll find food, water, maybe some answers. That's all that matters right now. Mark looked over at him. You sound like you've done this before. Banks gave a small, humorless smile. Not this exactly. But I've been lost before. Rule number 1. Stay still if you are alone. Move toward civilization, not away from it. If you can see it. James nodded. Guess that makes sense. They walked on in silence for a few minutes, the steeple drawing nearer. The shape of buildings began to form around it, low, crumbling silhouettes half swallowed by the earth. Mark broke the silence again. You think they'll even speak our language? Banks gave him a look. Let's find out if they're alive first. James smirked faintly. Fair point. As they crested a small rise, the town came fully into view. A cluster of decayed structures, roofs collapsed, streets buried in earth. The church steeple still stood at the center, leaning slightly but intact. Mark slowed his pace. That's not what I was hoping for. Banks scanned the ruins, his expression tightening. No smoke, no movement. Looks like it's been abandoned for a long time. James swallowed, his voice low. Then what the hell happened here? Banks didn't answer. He just started walking again, toward the silent town and the broken steeple that had drawn them in. The three men crossed the last stretch of open ground in silence. The closer they got, the clearer the decay became. Walls half collapsed, doors hanging from one hinge, windows shattered into black, empty sockets. Mark wrinkled his nose. Smells like metal and dust. James nodded. Like the air's been trapped here for years. Banks stepped over a broken fence and into what had once been a street. The ground was uneven, scattered with bits of pottery, rusted nails, and the remains of carts. "Stay close," he said quietly. "We'll check a few buildings, see if anything's left." Looks almost medieval. They moved cautiously between the ruins. The silence was thick. No wind, no echo of their footsteps, just the faint creak of old wood shifting under its own weight. Mark peered through a doorway. Inside, a table still stood upright, covered in a thick layer of dust. A single cup sat on it, untouched. He frowned. It's like everyone just left. James crouched beside a wall, brushing dirt away from a small pile of bones. "No," he said softly. "They didn't leave." Banks looked over his shoulder. "How many?" "3 here," James said. "More down the street." They followed the road deeper into the town. The church steeple loomed above them now, its bell long gone, the tower split down one side. The main square opened before them, wide, empty, and silent. At its center stood a massive stone slab, half buried in the ground but still upright. Moss and cracks covered its surface, but the carved letters were deep and clear. The Dungeon of Echoes. Mark stopped a few paces away. "That's not a church name." Banks stepped closer, tracing the grooves of the letters with his fingertips. "No, it's a warning." James looked around the square. Skeletons lay scattered near the edges, some slumped against walls, others curled as if they'd died trying to hide. "Whatever this place was," he said, "it didn't end well." Mark lifted his phone and snapped a photo of the stone. The flash lit the square for a heartbeat, and for that instant the letters seemed to shimmer, like something beneath the surface had stirred. He lowered the phone slowly. "You guys saw that, right?" James frowned. "Saw what?" "The letters," Mark said. "They moved." Banks stared at the stone, his jaw tight. "Maybe it's just the light." But even as he said it, the air seemed to shift. A faint vibration, almost like a breath. The silence broke with a soft metallic sound, echoing from somewhere below the square. Clang, 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 slow, rhythmic, deliberate. James turned toward the sound, his voice barely a whisper. "That's coming from under us." Banks looked down at the cracked earth around the stone. "Then there's something below this town." Mark's grip tightened on his phone. "You think that's the dungeon?" Banks didn't answer. He just stared at the stone, the carved words catching the dim light. "The Dungeon of Echoes." "Well, at least we know we are still on Earth," said James. "English look?" he said, while pointing at the stone embossed sign. The metallic rhythm grew louder. Clang, clang, clang. Banks turned slowly toward the sound. The air had changed, thicker now, carrying the faint stench of rot. James's voice trembled. "Do you smell that?" Mark nodded, eyes darting around the square. "Yeah, like something's been dead a long time." The sound came again, closer this time. Then another joined it, a scraping, dragging noise, like metal being pulled across stone. From the far end of the street, a figure emerged. It moved with a jerking, uneven gait, its bones slick with patches of blackened flesh that clung like wet paper. The skull hung at an angle, jaw half detached, teeth grinning through strands of dried sinew. A rusted sword jutted straight through its ribcage, the blade protruding from its back like a broken spine. Mark stumbled backward. "What the hell is that?" Banks raised his axe instinctively. "Stay behind me!" More figures appeared from the side streets, dozens of them. Their armor was shattered, fused to their bones by time and decay. Some still wore fragments of chainmail that rattled as they moved. Others dragged their own weapons, leaving trails of rust and dust in their wake. One skeleton's arm was missing entirely, the other gripping a spear that had pierced straight through its torso and out the other side. Another had a helmet fused to its skull, the metal melted into the bone. Their eyes were hollow, but something glowed faintly within, a dull, pulsing light, like embers buried deep in ash. James backed away, voice cracking. "They're everywhere. Look!" From every alley, every broken doorway, the dead were rising, slow, deliberate, their movements stiff but unstoppable. The air filled with the sound of scraping metal and the faint, wet sound of rotting flesh shifting against bone. Banks swung his axe as one lurched too close. The blade struck the creature's shoulder, splintering bone, but it didn't stop. It reached for him, fingers curling like claws, the sword still jutting from its chest. "Run!" Banks shouted. "Go!" They turned and sprinted toward the center of the square. The sound of pursuit followed, the clatter of armor, the drag of weapons, the rasp of dead breath that shouldn't exist. Mark's foot caught on a loose stone, and he nearly fell. James grabbed his arm, pulling him upright. "Come on!" Banks looked around desperately, and then he saw it. Near the base of the carved stone, half hidden by debris, a stairway led down into darkness. "There!" he shouted. "Down there!" They didn't hesitate. The three of them lunged toward the opening just as the first of the undead reached the square. The creatures were close enough now that the stench was overwhelming, a mix of rust, rot, and something sour, like old blood baked into the earth. One reached out, its fingers brushing Mark's sleeve. The skin on its hand tore away, leaving bones slick with black residue. Mark screamed and dove down the stairs. James followed, then Banks, swinging his axe one last time before disappearing into the dark. The moment they crossed the threshold, the sound changed. The echo of the undead above grew muffled, distant, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. They stopped only when the last flicker of daylight vanished behind them. The stairway descended into blackness, the air cold and damp. Mark gasped for breath. What? What was that? Banks stared upward, listening to the faint clatter of bones above. That, he said quietly, was the welcoming committee. The stairwell shuddered as the first of the undead reached the opening above. 3 skeletal warriors stepped into the narrow descent, their armor scraping the stone walls. The flicker of their hollow eyes lit the darkness with a sickly orange glow. Each carried a weapon fused to its bones, one with a sword melted into its arm, another with a rusted mace welded to its wrist, and the third dragging a broken halberd that screeched against the steps. Banks raised his axe, his breath ragged. 3 of them, he said. Stay behind me. But there was nowhere to run, only down into deeper dark. The first skeleton lunged, its sword arm slashing through the air. Banks met it head-on, swinging upward. The axe split the skull with a crunch that echoed down the stairwell. The body collapsed, bones scattering down the steps like dice. The second skeleton came fast, its mace arm swinging wide. Banks stepped forward, then stopped. The narrow stairwell boxed him in. If he fought alone, the others would be trapped behind him, easy prey if more came from above. He realized he couldn't hold the line by himself. They all had to fight, or none of them would make it out. "Mark, James, we do this together," he shouted, tossing the axe to Mark. "Pass it when you're done." Mark caught the weapon awkwardly, nearly dropping it as the undead slammed into him. James rushed forward to help, the 2 of them grappling with the creature as its jaw snapped inches from their faces. The stench of rot filled the air. "Hold it still," Banks barked. Mark shoved his shoulder against the creature's ribs while James grabbed its arm, twisting hard. The thing hissed and thrashed, but Mark swung the axe up and buried it deep into its neck. Bone cracked, and the creature fell limp between them. The third skeleton was already descending, dragging its halberd and snarling. James caught the axe as Mark tossed it over. "Go!" Banks yelled, bracing himself to block the narrow passage. James charged, slamming into the creature before it could swing. The halberd scraped sparks from the wall as James fought to keep it pinned. Its teeth snapped at his face, the sound sharp and hollow. Mark grabbed its arm, pulling it back just long enough for James to raise the axe and drive it down through the skull. The blow shattered bone and sent the creature collapsing in a heap. For a moment, the stairwell went still. The three men stood shoulder to shoulder, panting, the axe heavy in James's hands. Banks took it back, his expression grim but steady. "That's why I gave it up," he said. "One man can't fight three directions at once, but three men with one weapon, that's a chance." Mark wiped black residue from his face, nodding. "Then we keep fighting like that." Banks looked down into the darkness below, where the deep hum had grown louder, steady, rhythmic, like something breathing beneath the stone. He tightened his grip on the axe. "Yeah," he said. "Together. That's how we survive." "Hey, do any of you see that?" said Banks.